Hey, Chris, Liege Games. Here we are. We're talking Galactic Renaissance, Matago, Christian Martinez. It's Ines in space, or so we've been told. How does it compare? What do you need to know? What are some highs? What are some things that you may find appealing, or things that you may find that you don't want to see or you don't like in a game? Running you through the main mechanics of what you need to know to decide whether or not this game is right for you. My highs, my lows, everything else in between. Let's do this. So the first thing you're going to want to know is, what is Galactic Renaissance? It's an area-controlled diplomacy as a game where a war is being fought without ever having any battles. Just like Enos in this situation, this is not a game that's decided by the most efficient engine or by random dice rolls. This is about timing of card play that is going to be the most essential. The beauty of this drafting system of the specialist, as well as the manipulation of your deck, is that when you can do that right, you are going to feel absolutely amazing. The drafting pool and the manner in which you're drafting, though, is going to allow you to never feel like you are just getting a bad shake. And that, in a nutshell, there is how it is very similar to Enos, with a different theme, with a different overall mechanistic approach, but a very similar design perspective that you can see traces of and threads throughout that Christian Martinez has clearly based in somewhat of a similar manner. This is a game that plays on the players rather than just the game itself. And so with a game like this, similar to Enos or Root, if you enjoy that style of things, this is going to give you very heavy, similar vibes in a new tangential way. And I say that as a very positive thing. It's chaotic, it's situational, it's close quarters, it's claustrophobia in a space situation. And that's the main thing that you need to know. Depending on your player count, this is going to vary highly on how claustrophobic you are when it comes to trying to fill and occupy the spots on the board, mainly being these planets that have a certain limited capacity in terms of the term used in this game, stability. And what stability refers to is the amount of spaces that are going to be available for not just your workers, but also other proponents of things that may go in there. You have three different things that can be placed on these. You have your emissaries, you have your institutions, and you have your foundations. Now, this is obviously just a prototype version of it. So what those are actually going to look like and the final shape and form of those is drastically different than what you see here in front of you. These are your little foundations. They look like little spool threads. And then your institutes are the little flat discs, the wooden discs here. And then your emissaries are just your little workers that you can see placed around here at various planets. And so as you develop the game board, you're going to be grabbing one of these stability tokens, one of these planets, and then putting them together thus forth, having a different number of spots on this side and three similar spots on this side, and some with an asymmetric when this planet is explored or played onto the game board, you have this effect that takes place. And so that's the main gist of what you're doing as an exploration side of this game. Then what you really need to know is you have a limited number of these emissaries that you're going to be manipulating around this board, going from planet to planet to planet to planet via the use of portals. And you'll see that on the side of these planet boards, we have three different portal icons. When you are exploring, you are placing one down. Then you will also have a token that you are taking and is slowly going across each of these three that will add an additional portal to this area, allowing potentially for two different spots. After you lay out and explore a planet, this guy moves to the next area. And so that keeps it a little bit open, because you're going to be traveling back and forth from these planets with your emissaries, trying to establish area control, trying to establish majority, strongness or weakness, or even just manipulation of those areas in the first place, because it's going to help you in several different ways, which we'll talk about in a minute. Now, it wouldn't be complete if you couldn't also manipulate the number of spots here available for those emissaries, institutes, and foundations, because this is the other dynamic of this game that is going to be very hit or miss for people, what they call disorder. And so what happens is, if this is ever overflowing after somebody has played all of their cards on their turn, then the disorderly phase happens, where essentially stuff is going to get cleared out, folks. And stuff is going to get removed, and it's going to be your stuff. It's going to be everybody's stuff who is involved on said planet in the first place. And so that's going to be the trick. And that's going to be, how often do you want to trigger that? Do you want to purposely trigger that? And when do you want to purposely trigger that? Because it's going to cause havoc in a very small space. And as you can see, especially in spaces like this, where you only have 6 different spaces, to have a majority in a 3 or 4 player game, you don't have to have a lot on the board. And 4 people trying to get on the same planet here, that's going to be a tight fit. So how do you manage that? How do you utilize that? How do you manipulate that is going to be the key. What I have set up here is sort of a later game 2-player mode, so you can see a little bit of what that looks like. What you're going to be doing at the beginning of this game is you're going to have a standard deck of cards that are going to have essentially abilities, asymmetric abilities, that you are going to be choosing from on a turn-by-turn basis as your operations, which is designated by the green. The disorder can only be done with the red icons as one of your options when that happens. But what you're going to be doing is you're going to be playing these cards down, potentially one at a time or more, if you have the little icon that gives you an additional turn bonus here at the bottom, as you can see there. But what you're going to be utilizing these in order of doing is manipulating those emissaries, institutes, and foundations on the board in one of 7 different asymmetric ways. And you'll notice that I actually have a lot more than 7 cards in my hand here, because along the way, you will be adding specialists that are completely asymmetric in addition to what you already are beginning with, because everybody starts with the same core 7 and then get one special specialist at the beginning of the game. And this is a very large stack of specialists here that are all asymmetric that you'll be slowly adding. And oftentimes when you are adding them, you are getting to fan through multiple at a time, choosing one and placing it in your deck in order to gain its abilities. The tricky part there is when you add these to your deck, you're usually adding it on top of your deck. And so you're getting access to it in a very specific manner. That also goes to the turn order and the gameplay, in the sense that you will also be, when you play cards, discarding them, not to a discard pile, but to underneath your deck itself. So if I play these 3 cards on my turn, then in order of me playing them, I put them on bottom, on bottom, on bottom in the order that I played them. And then you are drawing at the end of your turn to replenish your hand. And how you're going to be doing that then in this way is how you're going to have the options that are going to give you the highly tactical nature of this game in the first place, with a strategic element overarching. This is primarily a game of strategic conflict avoidance until absolutely necessary, with a few big punches finally throwing in. Now, you're probably wondering, well, Chris, how do I actually win this game? And so what I've got set up here in the middle is an end game scoring. And what you do at the beginning of the game is you will have a series of objectives to score points with laid out in the beginning. 2 of them face up, 3 face down. You'll see that there are face down ones underneath these 2. And so when you reach certain thresholds, when someone crosses in terms of total victory scoring points here, that's when certain things are going to happen. When somebody first reaches 5 points, the 3rd one gets flipped up. When somebody first reaches 10 points, then you actually flip the 2 in the first area. When someone reaches 15, you flip the 2 in the middle. And so it drastically changes the scoring conditions as you're going along. So you cannot be one of those one-trick ponies. You have to be able, willing, and change is going to be essential in how you are going to overcome these differences in beginning of game versus end game scoring. It's very similar to Enos in a sense in the way the end game works, though. You'll notice on the middle of this track, you can see the points scored. You need to get 30 points. However, if you're familiar with table tennis rules, or tennis, if you will, you have to not just get to 30, but you have to get to 30 and have scored 10 points either in the turn that crosses the 30 threshold, or after you've reached 30, have a 10-point scoring turn subsequently in order to win the game. And that's where the big move really becomes important, because at the beginning of the game, you're going to be scoring 1s and 2s and maybe, point here or there. And then all of a sudden, mid-game, as someone breaches the 5, as someone breaches the 10, someone breaches the 15, you will have large swings in point movements upwards of 10, 14, 16 points, all in one fell swoop. Because again, going back to these cards that you're going to be utilizing, playing through, and comboing, because you will have multiple of them, especially of the specialist variety, that will give you additional turns at the bottom, giving you multiple turns with multiple cards being played to rack up how strategic and tactical you can be, all wrapped into one on a single advantageous turn. And it goes very quickly. It starts out very slowly, and that's going to drive people crazy a little bit. But when it ramps up, folks, it ramps up like a Shelby GT. Now, I mentioned the end game scoring objectives. I mean, I have a whole stack of them right here. And so you have 5 in any one game. The rest are just put back in the box. I have enough here to have 3 separate games where I never have duplicate. And so it's going to offer you variety without having to have 70 different mechanisms that you're going to be utilizing. So what do you do on a turn, though? What does a turn actually look like, right? So let me show you what a turn actually looks like so you can get a sense of the flow. As you're playing, you're going to be having your workers on your home base planet here. And so over here is Orange's home base planet, and I have a various variety of emissaries here that are going to be attached. And this has 2 portals, yellow and red, which means any other planet that has a red portal or a yellow portal is considered adjacent, no matter where it is spatially on the actual board. And so what you're doing here is you're manipulating these to other areas. My institutes here have been taken off of the center disk here from my planet board, my player board, if you will. And as it slowly gets unrevealed, then you get various upgrades. You get to draw a card, or this limits your hand size that you draw up to at the end of every turn. So if all of my institutes are off, in this case, I draw back up to my hand limit of 5 at the end of my turn. So every turn I'm going to start with 5 cards. And so I take a look at these cards and I say on my turn, what do I want to do? And so you can see, okay, operation card, operation card, operation card with an extra linking combo turn, operation card, operation card. So I have 1 card that's going to give me more than 1 action. And so if we look at this geneticist here, for example, you can see that this is a specialist in terms of what it's doing. Move one of your emissaries to a planet where you are not present to score a victory point. So I take one of these from my home planet. Do I have any planets that do not have presence? Oh, yep, I do right over here. I do that, and then I would score a point. Well, I'm already at 30 in this case, so 1 point doesn't matter. I need to get 10 points in order to win. But you can see that I get another action at the bottom designated by that. So this card gets played down, and then I can take a look at what else I have in my hand. So essentially, you have a couple cards in here that are going to be scoring. The big one is the Senator. The Senator is the one card that everyone has that's going to score the objectives in the center. And so it says move one of your emissaries to the hub. At the beginning of the game, 1 planet is going to be designated as the initial starting planet, and that is considered the hub. And so in this case, my hub was this one as well. And so then you're going to see that I score my victory points for each face-up objective card. Face-up objective card, face-up objective card, face-up objective card. Each shared planet where you are present and having 1 blue portal, shared being more than 1 person there, I get 1 blue point. No blue portal, none, yes, yes. So I would get 3 points there. Then the middle one here, each planet with at least 1 foundation where you are strong. Foundation being, again, this guy. And then when you scroll back over here, where I'm strong. Strong meaning I have exactly 2 presence. And so orange has 2 presence here, 2 presence on this planet, 1 here, 2 here, and 1 here. And so then that would be 3 different planets. That's going to be 6 points to get me here. And then each allied planet except for your home planet. And so allied planets, as you control planets, you have the ability to acquire discs off of the top of them, which give activating abilities that you can utilize as one of their specials for the control of them, which is going to be grabbed back and forth, which is what is slotted here on the camera on the planetary player board that you can see. And I have 3 slotted here. However, one of them, Hongze is my home planet. So I would get 2 more here, 2 more points, 2 more for this, which is total of 4 points. So that is a total of more than 10 points. So that would be an end game scoring win for me if I was, breaking 30 at that point. That is how your turn is going to go. Now, if something else had happened, if I hadn't been able to end the game, let's say over here for a second, we actually didn't get that 10 points. We weren't able to score all of those. It didn't line up. Mashkata over here now all of a sudden has more spots than stability points. And so if I did not end the game there after playing all of my action cards, then you would go to the disorder phase. And so you go around for everyone that is present at this planet, and you have to take one of 4 different actions. Removing one of your emissaries from there, moving 2 of your emissaries from this to an allied planet that is adjacent via the portal. So I only have 1, so I could move 2 there. Removing one of my institutes from there, Or I can play a disorder card. Well, you saw in my hand, all of my cards were green, so I don't have any disorder cards I can play. And the tricky part in there is that you go around and everyone has to do it. Even if I was to manage to take all of those off now so that it's not still overflowing, green is still going to have to take one of those actions until everyone is done equally that is involved with that conflict of disorder there. And then it's done. But the tricky part is, if you're just there and you're even a bystander, you can potentially lose things. So, depending on how take that you want to be in this game, this can be a very big element of things, especially at the higher player counts. But it's also a way with a lot of these specialists that they manipulate the board, because you can see right here that you're seeing a lot more red icons as I'm scrolling through, just through the first couple here. And so when you have, say, a card like this that has two different icons, you can choose to play it as an operation card during your turn, or during a disorder whenever it happens, and it gives you something else differently. And so there's a lot more here that you're going to be utilizing. And so that's where it goes, especially at the higher player counts. It's going to be claustrophobia, and there's not a lot of room in these. So in order to get yourself some room on some of these planets at the higher player counts, you're going to have to force disorders to happen throughout the game. And how often you do, and to what extent, and how well you can manipulate your forces, not just back to your home planet, because that's not going to behoove you, but to your other allied planets, or the manipulation of other people's there to make space for your own, is going to be the key. And do you like a mechanic that is going to be manipulated like that? That is probably the biggest crux of this game as a whole. There are a few other minor things here that you need to be aware of. You only have so many emissaries. You only have so many foundations. You only have so many initiatives. You only have so many spots for these planet ally tokens to go through. And you only have 5 of them, meaning if you try an ally with a 6th, you're going to have to take one of these out, but it can't be your home planet either. And these are all going to be asymmetric abilities that you can intermittently activate if you're still the one controlling it. But if someone else is controlling it, someone else can steal these away at any time. So there's got to be a lot of movement. Now, there are a ton of planets as well. So there is a lot of variety just from that aspect, because again, all of these planets have different activating discs. And all of these planets will be randomly paired, again, with one of these stabilities that you're going to be pulling out. Anywhere from a 5 to a 9. Depending on the player count is going to depend on the numbers of the higher ones of 7, 8s, and 9s. So that's going to be the other variable count. At the higher player counts, there'll be more 7, 8s, and 9s, but it's still very cramped. And I say that as a neutral point, as a positive or negative, depending on how you feel about that in a game like this. A lot of this game is built around the manipulation of your pieces based on the location of other pieces. A lot of these cards are based just solely off of that. Explore a new planet, move one of your emissaries from your starting planet to that new explored planet. Then move one of your emissaries to a planet where there's a foundation and draw a card. We talked about the victory points. Choose a planet where you're present. Remove as many emissaries from this planet as there are institutes, and place one of your own on there. Add an emissary to a planet where you're present. You have specialists here that are going to manipulate. Move one of your emissaries from one planet to another. Move one of your emissaries to where you're not present. So, I mean, there's a lot of manipulation in terms of the institutions, the foundations, and the emissaries back and forth. So you don't need 6 different, asymmetric options that you're going to be utilizing. You are highly manipulating the few elements that you have, which is very similar to Enos. How well you manipulate those concise, precise situations is really going to be the make it or break it for you in this game. So what do I think of this game? Pros in this game. I love the objectives here. I love having only 2 of them face up at the beginning, having the third one flipped up, and then having them get flipped over to the opposite side to just completely screw with people. And I say that in a very good way. Like, I am a huge agent of chaos in games like this, and I hate people that are like, I'm going to take this strategy, and this is the best strategy, and this is what's going to win me the game, right? Like, I'm going to go for this strategy from the beginning, and people that try and people that try and min-max, all these types of heavy Euro worker placement style games, they are going to fall flat in this, because as soon as that one gets flipped over that they were emphasizing, it's going to throw their strategy completely out the window. And if you can't adapt to what's in front of you, you're going to be left behind. And so I love the tactical nature of this. I also love the portal system. The portal system is very intuitive. It's very weird, but it works so well. And you have this guy that's going to be adding potentially a second portal, and sometimes you just need that second portal to get put on one of these areas, and it comes up, and sometimes it ends up with the same one on there, so you don't have access to that planet, which is going to limit how you can get there, and it's going to create a different dynamic than if you could get there in the first place. Personally speaking, again, I love the specialist deck. There are so many options, and almost every time you're taking the specialist from like the beginning of the game on, like I mentioned, you're going to be drawing more than one and having your choice. You're never forced to just get a random bad draw off the top. Up, I didn't get the one I needed. Up, next person got the one they needed. They're going to win. You never run into that because, okay, at the end of the game, you're going to be pulling 3, 4, or even 5 of these at a time and getting to choose between them. And that's not insignificant because you can then engineer where this card is potentially going to go, because oftentimes this card is going to go not on your discard pile, not on the bottom of your deck, but it's going on top of your deck. So it is the first card that you were drawing. Oh, and the other thing I didn't mention is at the end of every turn, before you draw up your cards, if I play 2 of my cards here and then I'm left with 3 cards and I go, this card is never going to work for me with where I am in the game state, right? I can discard a card automatically just for free and then fill back up, say in this case to 5 cards, essentially getting rid of a card that I'm never going to be utilizing or needing, but also keeping cards that I want. And that's the trouble with a lot of deck building situations, right? That you can't get rid of sometimes the cards that you need to get rid of, and you're stuck with ones, or you have a hand that's sort of meh, right? Like you've pulled those cards out of your deck and you've got a really, really awesome hand here, and then your next hand, because the way your deck is distributed isn't as good. This takes an Aeon's End approach where you don't shuffle. And I like the no shuffle. I like it a lot in this game. It works really well. Now, one downside of that is, like I mentioned, none of these cards allow you to thin your deck. None of these cards eliminate cards from your deck, at least of the vast majority of them that I have seen. I have not literally read through the whole specialist deck, so I cannot say that for certain. But I've not run into one yet that allows you to do that, and I think I'm right on that aspect. If I'm not, well, you can let me know in the comment section down below. I'm sorry. But that's probably the biggest downside. But because you get to choose the order you play them in, essentially also, if you're keeping track a little bit of when stuff is going to come up. So if you want to get to that, well, you play a couple cards, maybe have a slightly less than optimal turn, discard an extra card, and so you're burning through the deck faster that way to get to the good stuff, especially at the end game, to get to that senator that I showed you that scores the middle objectives. That becomes all the important that you can have access to it. Other downside here, it's a space hog. Yeah, I'm sorry for the pun, but it takes up a fair amount of space here. My table here is fairly well crammed. I have 6 planets that are accounted for here, 1 player board here, 1 player board off to the side here. But if you have 4 players potentially playing, with my last 2-player game, this was not actually all the planets that were accounted for. We had about 3 or 4 more planets. So we're sitting at about 9 or 10 different planets here just with 2 players. And that's a relatively good sized area on the table. And so you just need to be aware of that because of how you're putting these little planet tokens around your own player board. You have your own starter planet, here that you're keeping track of as well. And so there's just a lot of your own personal space. And then there's a lot of in between, although you can put them anywhere because that's kind of the nice thing that they're always considered adjacent as long as the portals are the same color. The other nice thing that I did not talk about at the beginning of the game is the asymmetry, right? Like if people are concerned, like this is everybody starting with the same thing. Well, yes, you start with the same 7 core cards, but you get to draft an asymmetric specialist to add to your deck for the total of 8. And then you also get to draft one of these emissary cards. And these emissary cards tell you how many emissaries you're starting with on your player board in the first place, how many workers you're starting with, right? And so you get to choose, if you're the first player, whether you want one of these emissary cards first or one of the specialist cards first. And you have to end up with one of each. So if you choose the emissary, someone else might get the first choice of the specialist and vice versa, or snake drafting sort of a way. So it balances it out there to give a little bit like if you want 7 emissaries to start out with, well, someone else is going to grab the better specialist that's beginning of the game. And so they may only have 5 specialists, but truth be told, there's not a huge dynamic shift there either way because you're going to be able to make up for it either way very quickly as well. Downsides? Things I didn't like, things you may not like at this point? Well, again, this is going to be a very crowded area on the board spaces with these stability spots, because especially the lower stability spots with the 5s and the 6s and even the 7s at the 3 and 4 player count, you're going to be having a lot of disorder go on even unintentionally, because the amount of emissaries you're going to have to get on there to have a majority to get planet control, because planet control is going to be important, or to be able to take the interactions that you need at said planets in the first place in order to manipulate your cards and the victory point scoring conditions. And so it's going to be a lot more from that aspect. The red components of the disorder cards are going to become more important. And if you do not like the claustrophobic feeling of not being able to go where you want to go as easily, and having the disruption and the chaotic nature of things on a turn-by-turn basis, and having everyone at an area disrupted, even if you're not the one that sort of tilted the balance off kilter, that may be something that you really don't like in this game. Also, the other aspect of things that I can see people not liking is, like I mentioned, that the build up at the beginning is very slow. It's very tedious. You're building, and then all of a sudden I went from scoring 1 point, 2 points, 4 points, and then 16, just like that. And so that is going to happen potentially depending on how things fall in your favor in terms of what gets flipped up here or flipped over here in the objectives, but also just how well people are keeping track of where your stuff is comparatively. This is one of those games similar to Enos in that sense, that if you are not completely aware of what other people's standing and presence is on the board and how that meaningfully interacts with the endgame scoring conditions, this game could go very lopsided, a la a Root or Enos sort of situation. And so the more you have people that are aware of that, the more that they're going to get enjoyment out of keeping people in check. Because again, it's not first 1 to 30. It's first 1 to 30 and scoring 10 points on the same turn, which is harder than it seems, especially with those shifting dynamics on the planets and how often the planet dynamics will influence the end game scoring of these situations. That's going to break the 10-point threshold as well. All in all, final thoughts here at the end. What do I think of it? I like it much better than Enos. I have no affiliation with Enos in terms of the thematic incorporation, the mechanistic approach. I just like this better. It's very clean. It's very nuanced. It's very tactical. It gives you lots and lots of replayability and variability without needing, 4 boxes of expansions or additional content. Every game is going to be different because it's going to depend on the tactical nature mixed with a component of the specialists you draw and the objectives that are put out there. I don't need something that's going to be, 3 boxes sometimes in order to achieve that. Having that all self-contained, that manipulates itself in order to give you a different and better potentially experience each time you play, is something that I cannot say about every single game like this. And this one really achieves what it's going for in that sense. So that is my final thoughts on Galactic Renaissance Matago crowdfunding on the 21st. There you go. Let me know if you have comments, questions, or concerns down below, and I will try and answer them the best I can. Thanks for watching. Stay classy. Subscribe. See you around.